What wars did you fight in and how long did they last? Were any of them just? What would you say now to young people who are thinking of joining the military?
The following video was written and produced by Cecilia Dean. Cecilia chose to interview her father, Samuel Dean, for a student project at Teach to the Text. Thank you to Cecilia and the Dean family for allowing us to share this interview so that God may do with it what he will. Pax Christi.
Have soldiers' minds changed since the ancient Greek times? In the ancient Greek times, it was honorable to fight under your leaders. The soldiers didn't use their reason on whether they should be fighting or not. Nowadays, it is your duty, according to the government, to fight in the wars. But some of us have a better understanding of what our duty is. It is following and serving God, not the state. In the Iliad, soldiers were fighting because it got them glory. Even now, some soldiers fight for glory, adventure, and challenge. But some now regret their choice. Let's hear from someone who regrets his choice.
What wars did you fight in and how long did they last?
The first war I fought in was Desert Shield, Desert Storm. I arrived in Saudi Arabia with one of the first units in August of the 5th Special Forces Group and stayed there until April. We left a little earlier than most because our jobs were done. And after that, I spent many tours in the Balkans, Bosnia, Kosovo. Weren't active fighting wars, but they were hostile fire zones considered by the military. And then many tours to Kuwait and Saudi Arabia in the intervening years before we invaded Iraq. And then finally in Afghanistan in 2009 and 10. And that was 7 months in Afghanistan.
Were any of them just?
At the time, I didn't pay much attention to whether or not they were just. They weren't. Looking back on them, not one of them met even the most rudimentary requirements of the just war tradition, the Catholic Church.
Did your view on fighting change? If so, when and why?
It did. I grew up in a family. My father had been in the military in World War II. All of my uncles had been in the military during World War II, some of them in Korea and Vietnam, and 2 brothers were in Vietnam. So being in the military was looked on as a viable service to the country. So when I joined the military, it was without any reservations. Certainly hadn't heard anything about the just war tradition, teaching, or whatever they want to call it. I went to college at a Catholic University, University of Dayton. The ROTC department never talked about just war. Not once during my time during being in the military did I ever hear a chaplain discuss it. So my thoughts on killing was simply part of the life of a soldier. Towards the end of my career in the military, as I started questioning many things about our country, the history, the wars that I had been in, I came to terms with the fact that maybe what I was doing was not just. And after I retired in 2010, I was challenged by a local priest not to look into the just war tradition, but just the fact that in discussing with him his views on just war, I realized that I didn't know the first thing about it. So when I looked into the just war tradition of the church, I was quite scandalized by learning that none of my wars were just, and that the teachings of Jesus were clearly for us to imitate his life and teaching of nonviolent love of friends and enemies. So it was at that point after I retired that I realized that killing was no longer part of the natural law as presented by Jesus.
Did anyone tell you you shouldn't be fighting?
At the time, no, there was never any thought of that at all. We simply received our orders, and you started planning, and you took the unit or went with the unit to whatever combat zone you were going to. There was never any question about that. Certainly the chaplains in mass, the military bases, never brought that up. So no one ever, that idea was never discussed.
Did you ever doubt your change of thought?
Oh, certainly as I was researching the Just War tradition and teachings of nonviolence. Part of my military career as a special forces officer is we would get a mission to an area, and I and my team and I would have to learn everything about the area, the history of the region, the topography, the important people, the lower level people, the interactions, all of their differences. So that takes a lot of time to learn that properly before you deploy into an area. So I did the same thing with the church's teachings on violence. I took a great deal of time to read it, but the longer I took to research it, the more obvious it became. The church's tradition on violence was shallow. Nobody really believed it. And the teachings on nonviolence were clear, but the churchmen seemed to be afraid of it. So there was some trepidation to moving in that direction, as so many people seemed to be against even discussing it. But after a while, the overwhelming evidence was that Jesus teaches nonviolent love of friends and enemies.
Who impacted your change?
Who impacted my change? Certainly Father Tom Blau, when he had the discussion with me in 2010 or 11 about the just war and how he believed that people who disagreed with the just war were just wrong. So when I realized I didn't know the first thing about the just war teachings of the church, and I had children who were coming of age to go into the military, that was a huge impact. He would never discuss with me after he realized which direction I went, what I found, especially when the evidence that I presented him was overwhelming. He won't talk about it anymore, but he was a huge impact. The Gospels were a huge impact. The writers of the Gospels, very clear, and the letters and the books of the New Testament. Father Charles McCarthy was a clear teacher and explainer of nonviolence and the problems with justified violence. I suppose there were many writers who would argue for the just war, and their arguments were so poorly done that their impact was simply to teach me that there was no way to really argue for it, not gospel.
What do you do now to live out this change?
Well, I never go along with a lie when anyone talks with me, and it's appropriate, about justified violence. I state the nonviolent teachings of Jesus. That has cost us, me and our family, some friends. But the most important thing is to simply live the gospel. I try to, on blogs, YouTube and commentary, to interject those teachings. And I work at a seminary, so I'm able to discuss those things with moral theologians. I've written many letters to bishops. I've talked to bishops. I don't know that I've converted too many people, but at least they get to hear the original tradition of the church.
Do you ever think about if you should be fighting before, during, or after the wars?
The early wars as a young officer, I didn't. I remember a time in 2010 in Afghanistan. I was a commander of a unit that was working with an Afghan infantry battalion. And we were also helping the Hungarians learn how to advise a combat unit in combat conditions. And there was a special forces detachment there with a captain in command of it working in our sector. And we both had pretty bad casualties on our unit, and we were just talking on the end of the day about what had happened, and we really came to the conclusion we didn't know why we were there. I mean, we both asked, "So what are we doing here?" We didn't see an end, a positive end to our efforts. We had spent months at that point in some pretty heavy combat, and we could see in the near future that those efforts and the losses we incurred were going to be for nothing, really. And as it turned out, it was. All the areas that we cleared and claimed as victory for the government were turned back over to the Taliban, who are now in charge of the entire country. But yeah, at that point, it was really a turning point in both of our careers, I think. I haven't talked to that officer since, but we kind of realized that that we really didn't know why we were there and why we were doing the things that we were doing.
Was there any glory seeking for you or your soldiers?
Certainly early in my career. I mean, it's a great adventure. It's exciting going off to war. I mean, I've read countless books by people who had gone off to war and glorified it. Later in my career, certainly in my last deployment, and there's still the adventure in going off and doing those things. There's the rush of adrenaline when you're in combat and preparing for it. But there's also the realization that the young men that you're working with and commanding, sending them into situations that death is certainly very much likely, that there's a price to pay that may not be worth it. And as I went farther into that deployment, it became more and more obvious to me that the dangers that we were enduring were certainly not worth. We weren't going to accomplish what our politicians claimed we were there to accomplish.
Was there any regret?
Oh, certainly. I mean, when things are happening early in my career, I had a bit of callousness. You have to. But looking back on some of the people that I interacted with, certainly regret that I didn't act in the ways that Jesus taught us to act. One example that may help you to understand. About a third of the way through my career, I was deployed to Bosnia, to a small town in the northeast part of the country. It was in the Russian sector. But I was there with just 5 other Special Forces soldiers, 2 Navy SEALs and 4 Special Forces soldiers. And our job was to, during the day, we were liaisons with the Serb 3rd Army Corps to help them move vehicles. They weren't allowed to move vehicles unless we got the permission and things like that. That was my official job. But in the evenings, my job was to go out and to find war criminals and to identify them, get their patterns, and report that back so that they could eventually be captured and taken to The Hague for a trial. So I met with a lot of rather unsavory characters. But one evening, early in the evening, I was out, and it was at a pool hall, and it just happened to be a young boy. He was probably 14 or 15 at the time, and I was playing pool with him. And we were just, I don't know why. I can't remember why he wanted to play pool with me, but we were playing. And later, while I was there, it was still early, he started talking about his experiences. He had been in Sarajevo, and that was some hours south from there, during the war, the early 90s, as a younger boy, obviously, and he had been in one of the militias. And he said that they would go into a Muslim apartment complex, and that they would, at night, and they would, it would be dark, and they would simply kill until the screaming stopped. And that was men, women, and children. And he kind of stopped, and he said to me, God will never allow me into heaven. And at the time, I just thought, oh man, this boy, I doubt he'll live for another year. He's going to put a gun to his head and blow his brains out. And I had to go on and do other things, and I never thought much about it. But I thought about that boy. That I should have spent some time with him, but I just didn't.
What would you say now to young people who are thinking of joining the military?
I have advised a number of young men about this, that the military is a corrupting organization. We make it out at times to be a pseudo-religious organization, and it is not. It is evil at its core, and it will corrupt you. It will demand you to compromise your integrity. And every young man that I've talked to afterwards has admitted that they were required to compromise in their faith, just in daily life in the military. You cannot live a true Christian life in the military. And that if ever called to war, a man that I met some time ago, we used to work with Charlie, John Carmody, who had fought in Vietnam. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you're asked to kill another human being, that you sacrifice your life first, that it's never worth taking another human being's life. It's not something you ever really get over. And I also talk about the nonviolent love of friends and enemies tradition, teachings of Jesus, and that is the true way of the church.
War has drastically changed over time. Some of these changes are the weapons, clothes, armor, and the reason they fight. In the Iliad, they were fighting for a girl for 10 years. Nowadays, they fight for power, land, and mineral rights. Back in the Greek times, there weren't very many wars going on at the time. Now, there are at least 5. And the casualties are much greater. There is a mass number of men slaughtered. The men used to wear armor and fight with swords. Now, men wear vests and helmets and fight with guns, missiles, tanks, and aircraft. Women are also allowed and encouraged to fight, which would be unheard of in the ancient Greek times. There are still some similarities. Men still fight for honor, they still strategize, they still wear protective gear, and they still have training.